Marissa Claybourne stepped out of Knot and Stitch with a cinnamon muffin in hand, and no car in sight. The Florida sun had mellowed to a warm glaze by late afternoon, catching the edges of parked sedans and casting shadows under the awning of the craft store. Her hand paused halfway to her mouth, the muffin's wax paper still crisp. The spot where she'd parked that morning, third from the left, beside the faded blue Subaru, was now empty. Not a scrape, not a tire mark. Just hot pavement and her own slowly rising pulse. She took a step forward, as if maybe she'd misremembered. But the painted white number on the curb confirmed it. The car was gone. In Lakemont Hills, her father had muttered at breakfast, "Even your tire alignment better look tidy." She stared across the lot in disbelief. Then her eyes caught a laminated sign on the nearby light post, "Parking subject to compliance check, HOA monitored." The bottom edge flapped lightly in the breeze, its laminate peeling like old wallpaper. A familiar shuffle sounded from across the street. Mrs. Caldwell, cardigan wrapped around her thin frame despite the warmth, stood on her porch behind a flowering crepe myrtle. She held a watering can, but didn't pour. Just watched. Marissa offered a polite nod, tight-lipped, no smile, and turned back toward the sidewalk. The muffin had already cooled in her hand. The walk home was quiet. Residential hedges trimmed to identical shapes lined the sidewalks. Mailboxes all black with gold numbers. A pair of HOA flyers drifted across a manicured lawn, one folding over itself like a defeated paper airplane. She stepped around them and kept walking. The Claybourne house sat a few blocks deeper into the neighborhood, an old ranch style with brick trim and a screened porch. The porch swing still creaked even when no one sat on it. As she approached, the scent of cut grass faded into the more familiar smell of old wood and lemon oil. Through the front window, she saw her father exactly where she expected, seated in his weathered armchair, newspaper open, half-finished glass of iced tea sweating beside him. He looked up as she opened the screen door. "No car?" he asked, folding the Lakemont Herald. "No car," she replied, setting the muffin, now abandoned, on the side table. "Did they tow it, or did it vanish in a puff of HOA-approved smoke?" She handed him the slip of paper she'd pulled from her mailbox. He squinted at the fine print. "Non-compliant rear overhang?" He arched a brow. "That Camry doesn't overhang a thing but logic." Marissa sank into the couch. "They didn't leave a notice on the car. Just this. No prior hearing. No warning." Frank whistled low through his teeth, tapping the paper against the armrest. "No hearing notice," he repeated. "Nope." He set the paper down. "Illegal." She blinked. "Just like that?" He pushed himself up, slow but steady, and crossed the room to the hallway closet. From behind a stack of board games and a folded beach chair, he pulled out a metal storage box. It rattled slightly as he carried it back and placed it on the carpet with a practiced thud. Dust floated up in lazy spirals. On the lid, faded marker, "Foreclosure Files 2009 to 2012. He cracked it open and began flipping through file tabs yellowed with age. "You know what HOA boards hate more than angry letters?" he asked without looking up. She tilted her head. "Clauses they forgot they signed." He stopped at a file labeled Lakemont Mortgage Reaffirmation Agreement, then grinned. "Let's see how well Belinda's board remembers their loan clauses." Belinda Knowles smiled too much for someone who just cost a neighbor $300. The HOA office smelled faintly of printer toner and lemon-scented cleaner, the kind that lingered long after the cleaning crew had left. Walls were lined with framed bylaws and community mission statements, each centered with military precision. A table of pastel pamphlets sat untouched beneath a motivational poster, "Pride in order is pride in community." Marissa sat opposite Belinda, arms folded. The office chair's plastic squeaked beneath her weight. Her voice was even, but her eyes didn't blink. "I'm requesting a formal hearing. Written notice, board review, the whole thing." Belinda's lips curled into a smile that never reached her eyes. "We reserve discretion, Miss Claybourne. The towing was in accordance with Section 12B. Our job is to protect the visual integrity of the neighborhood." Marissa tilted her head. Is that before or after you protect the rights of the people paying your salary? Beside Belinda, Donnie Malczek shifted in his seat. The treasurer's tie was askew, and his notepad had more doodles than notes. He kept checking his phone like he was waiting for an escape hatch to appear. Miss Claybourne, Belinda continued, you parked past the designated line by 8 inches. The board voted last year to enforce proportional symmetry between vehicle placement and curb alignment. Marissa blinked. That's not a real sentence. Donnie coughed. Belinda reached for a pamphlet titled, Curb Appeal, Community Peace, and held it delicately, like a sermon. We believe small deviations signal larger indifferences. Marissa stood. You know what else signals something? Tow trucks at a craft store. She didn't wait for a reply. Back home, Frank was already knee-deep in county filings. His living room looked like the legal wing of a historical society, binders stacked like sediment layers, sticky notes blooming from the spines. The local news murmured in the background about weather alerts and a story on porch theft deterrence. He didn't glance up when Marissa came in. I've got good news, he said, flipping a page. Belinda's HOA refinanced in 2017 with a second-tier credit union. Marissa dropped her purse on the couch. How is that good? He held up a copy of the public loan filing. Clause 6.1. States they cannot issue punitive action, fines, removals, tows, without a preemptive hearing and documentation. Otherwise, they risk breach. She stared at him. And if they breach? Loan can be recalled. Escrow funds suspended. Whole operation, paused. He said it like he was describing the weather. Later that week, Marissa sat at the Honeycomb, a narrow cafe tucked between the post office and an insurance branch that hadn't changed their logo since the Clinton administration. Booth cushions were patched in duct tape, and the chalkboard menu hadn't been erased properly in months. The lemon pie was famous, mostly because no one ever knew who made it. At a nearby table, 2 silver-haired residents whispered over their coffee. They towed her car, one said, slicing a fork through her pie. Next it'll be her porch swing, the other replied. Mrs. Caldwell sat a few seats away, her crossword open, pen still. She didn't say a word, but her hearing had always been better than her eyesight. She circled a word without looking down. Back at the house, Frank sat with a fresh printout in hand, eyes squinting behind his glasses. Escrow disbursement is under review, he muttered. They missed their 2022 compliance audit. Marissa raised an eyebrow. You mean? HOA funds can't move until they prove they're not misappropriating. He leaned back, tapping the side of the printout. Which is tough to do when you've already violated your loan terms. He pulled his old flip phone from a drawer, still functional, still absurd, and scrolled to a number stored under G. Cottle. He pressed call, listened, then smiled slightly. I think I have something for you. Grace Cottle hated coffee, but she sipped it anyway when trouble brewed. The booth at Lou's Diner hadn't changed in 20 years, still dark wood polished by elbows and pie plates, still uneven in one corner, still hosting the same framed photo of the 1996 church softball team. Grace sat across from Frank, blazer folded neatly beside her, reading glasses perched low enough on her nose to make a statement. She stirred her coffee without sugar or cream, eyes fixed on the manila folder between them like it might grow teeth. You're telling me, she said quietly, they filed as a community lakeside nonprofit? Frank nodded, sliding over a printed screenshot from the HOA's corporate registration. That's dangerously misleading, she said. They're a residential association, not a 501c3. This is a Trojan horse with a mission statement. From the counter, Lou grunted as he filled a carafe. Pie's still warm, he called out without being asked. Marissa slid into the booth beside her father, cheeks pink from the walkover. I printed their website, she said, handing Grace a stapled packet. It's a PR machine. Look at this, Memorial Lake Gala, May 27th. Sponsors, paid parking, raffle tickets. Not one permit mentioned. Grace flipped through it, eyes narrowing slightly. Commercial use. No reference to legal access or landowner permission. Frank tapped the folder. They played petty. We play precise. Lou delivered the pie without comment and poured coffee like a man pouring foundation. Grace didn't flinch. She sipped, then exhaled through her nose. All right, she said, setting her cup down. We're drafting a Phase 1 notice. It cites contractual breach under the mortgage agreement and asserts lender notification. We don't accuse. We illuminate. From across the diner, a young man in a navy fleece paused as he passed. He lingered half a beat too long before moving to a booth in the back. Marissa noticed his eyes. They hesitated. Thoughtful, almost sad. Kyle Knowles, she whispered. Grace glanced his way. Nephew? Marissa nodded. He does tech for the HOA. I think he's watching. He's conflicted, Grace said. That's useful. Back at the Claybourne house, Frank spread documents across the dining table like he was laying out a war map. Grace reviewed highlighted clauses in the refinance paperwork. Her voice never rose above conversational, but the air in the room felt sharpened. This clause, she said, tapping one line, states punitive action must be preceded by both notice and review. What they did to Marissa's car? That's breach. This clause is the match. Frank leaned back. And the fuse? Lender contact, she replied. We start there. The laptop on the corner desk chimed softly. Marissa crossed the room to check. A message from an unknown number. I didn't know what they did until I saw the bank name, K. Attached was a screenshot. A spreadsheet row, highlighted. Column title, Legal Timeline Adjustments. Editor, B. Knowles. Timestamp, edited 3 weeks before the actual hearing date. She turned the screen toward Frank and Grace. Grace only nodded once. That'll go nicely in the second packet. Marissa's phone buzzed again. Another message from the same number. Check attachment, internal memo backdated by Belinda. The HOA's printer jammed while trying to generate a refund check, it never recovered. Tuesday morning dawned clear and unusually quiet across Lakemont Hills. In the HOA office, the silence pressed in like a third person. Belinda sat rigid behind the desk, arms crossed as Donnie poked at the blinking screen. The check tray sat half-ejected, a strip of paper curling like a wilted petal. It won't process any payouts, Donnie mumbled. System says pending authorization. Belinda's jaw tightened. Reboot it. I've rebooted it. Twice. He looked up. The account's frozen. It's not a glitch. A single sheet sat between them, letterhead from Floridian Mutual Credit Union, marked urgent. It was clear, concise, and utterly unforgiving. Due to breach of contractual conditions under Mortgage Clause 6.1, all fund movement is temporarily suspended pending review. Belinda pushed the notice aside like it smelled bad. This is temporary. System maintenance. We'll issue a board statement to that effect. Donnie didn't respond. He reached for the old receipt bin and started tearing check stubs, his movements methodical but drained. By noon, the neighborhood had noticed. At the park bench near Caldwell's rose bushes, gossip bloomed faster than the flowers. Pools still closed. Mrs. Mills asked, folding her sun hat between her knees. Pump repair got cancelled, Mr. Walt replied, wiping pollen off his glasses. I heard the contract bounced. Twice this week, I've seen grass 2 inches tall near the clubhouse, Caldwell added. The Claybournes haven't mowed that tall since '08. Someone muttered, and the newsletter. They skipped April. That's never happened before. Back on his porch, Frank adjusted the brass hinge on the mailbox door with slow, deliberate care. The screwdriver in his hand was older than Belinda's HOA charter, and he used it with the precision of someone fixing something for the third time simply because it brought him peace. Marissa came out with a lemonade and sat beside him. She didn't speak at first. They've gone quiet, she said finally. Frank nodded. Quieter than I expected. Mrs. Caldwell passed by with her grocery cart, slowing just enough to lean over the railing. You notice the fountain's dry? She asked. Frank smiled. Maybe the water's on vacation. She squinted. Or the money is. Down near the parkway, Kyle Knowles walked with slow steps, earbuds in but no music playing. He paused near the corner lot, watching a hunched man struggle to step over a cracked patch of walkway. A thin smear of green moss glistened near the edge. The man caught himself against the hydrant with a soft curse. Kyle didn't move to help, he just watched, hands in his hoodie pocket, face unreadable. That evening, at Knot and Stitch, Marissa took down the old notice about knitting class schedules and replaced it with a printed sheet in bold letters. Ask questions. All of them. Lou's diner buzzed with its usual midweek crowd, but something was off. Fewer laughs, longer silences. Frank sat near the window, watching a group of retirees slowly realize that the HOA hadn't collected their event deposits, or responded to their calls. He let the silence fill in the rest. Later that night, as Frank locked up his filing cabinet, the porch light flicked on. Donnie stood at the bottom step, his shirt untucked and eyes tired. She won't say it, he began. Won't admit what's happening. But we're bleeding internally. There's nothing left to move. Vendors won't touch us without upfront. Frank didn't blink. What are you planning to do? Donnie shrugged. I don't know. I guess I'm hoping someone else already did it. An hour later, Marissa's phone buzzed. It was from Kyle. Belinda called it internal reclassification. She made me rename the line item fund. Attached was a spreadsheet. The line had been renamed 3 times in the past 6 weeks. Original, Community Event Reserve. Then, Visual Compliance Outreach. Finally, Legacy Enhancement Disbursement, Miscellaneous. And all of it under the same access code. He walked into Lou's cafe without Belinda's approval, for the first time in 2 years. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle as Kyle stepped inside, shoulders tucked slightly inward as though he expected the walls to notice. The smell of bacon grease and floor polish clung in the corners, warm and familiar. Regulars sat in their usual booths, spoons clinking against ceramic mugs. No one turned, but Lou caught his eye from behind the counter and gave a single, knowing nod. Kyle made his way to the back corner booth. Marissa was already there, nursing a lukewarm cup of tea. Across from her sat Frank, arms folded, his eyes sharper than the steam curling from the pie plate between them. Grace was last to arrive, punctual, as always, and slid in beside Kyle without a word. He didn't speak right away. Just set the USB drive on the table and pushed it toward the center. They're all here, he said. The memos, budget edits, staff instructions, some were written before I was even hired. Grace picked it up, her fingers deliberate. Passwords? None, he replied. They never thought someone would leak from inside. Frank didn't blink. And the entries? Kyle took a shaky breath. There are line items listed as maintenance, but there's no work order. I checked. No invoice, no contractor. Just transfers to a shell account. Grace already had her laptop out. The click of the USB sliding in sounded louder than it should have. I highlighted a few files, Kyle added, voice steadier now. Especially the ones involving that tennis court resurfacing. Belinda asked me to retrodate the request form. Said it was to align with vendor cycles, but... He didn't finish the sentence. Lou walked by and refilled Kyle's coffee without asking. No words, just a pat on the edge of the table. Kyle glanced up, then down again, both humbled and startled. A refill was Lou's way of saying you're one of us now. Across the cafe, Donnie Malczek pushed through the door, hair mussed, briefcase dangling loosely from his hand. He paused mid-step when he saw Kyle sitting with the Claybournes. Their eyes met. Donnie didn't say a word. He just exhaled softly, then veered toward the opposite side of the diner and found an empty booth alone. Back at the table, Grace leaned into her screen. Some of these aren't just sloppy. They're manipulated. Look, funds coded as community art expenses, then redirected under legacy projects. Frank opened his own worn folder and began writing by hand. We document. We file. We notify. To whom? Marissa asked. He didn't look up. The lender. The press. And the oversight board, if Belinda forgot they still exist. Grace stopped scrolling. This isn't just a freeze. This is probable fraud. Outside, the sun had begun to rise above the oaks that lined Main Street, casting long shadows across the sidewalk and sending stripes of light through the diner's blinds. A slow hum of realization seemed to pass through the place, quiet and invisible, but present. Frank folded the first copy of his letter, slid it into an envelope marked for Floridian Mutual. Another he addressed to the Lakemont Herald. A third he sealed but left blank on the front. Marissa watched him, her fingers curling around her tea mug. You ready for a community showdown? Frank didn't even look up. Only if they serve pie. When Frank Claybourne walked into the HOA meeting, he didn't raise his voice, he raised the room's temperature. The community center lights hummed just a bit too loudly, like they were reluctant witnesses. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of neighbors and nerves, set in uneven rows that had been straightened twice already. The air conditioner rattled once, then gave up entirely. In the back, a pot of coffee did its best imitation of hot water. No one reached for it. At the front, a banner stretched across the podium in faded navy and cream, Together for Tradition. Belinda Knowles stood beneath it, lips pressed in a professional line, her blouse the same pale green as the HOA forms that no one read anymore. Donnie stood to her left, gripping a clipboard with more effort than necessary. Kyle lingered off to the side, not quite seated, not quite ready. Belinda tapped the mic. It squealed once, then obeyed. Good evening, she began. As president of the Lakemont Hills HOA, I want to thank you all for your commitment to order, beauty, and community. Tonight's meeting will address ongoing landscaping delays and Q2 budget allocations. Her tone had the cadence of someone who knew her lines and hoped to get through them before the roof caved in. From the third row, Frank raised his hand. Several heads turned. He didn't wait to be acknowledged. I'd like to request speaking time. A beat passed. Belinda hesitated, but murmurs had already begun. A few residents nodded. Someone in the back whispered, "Let him talk." She exhaled through her nose. Go ahead, Mr. Claybourne. Frank stepped forward, not to the podium but just past the first row, beside an unused microphone stand. His voice didn't need help. Our HOA funds have been frozen by Floridian Mutual Credit Union, he said plainly. The mortgage agreement was breached when this board authorized punitive action without due notice, specifically, a vehicle tow with no hearing. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone shifted loudly in a plastic chair. Grace stood next, holding a binder. We have documentation, she said, calm and clipped. Financial entries with no supporting invoices. Internal fund reclassifications that obscure original use. Disbursements labeled for community wellness, spent instead on promotional events that lacked property access approval. She opened the binder and turned it toward the front row. A few residents leaned in. I've reviewed the logs, Kyle said, stepping forward. Some of those files were edited after events occurred. Others were entered by me under pressure, entries I didn't originate. I was asked to backdate several budget requests. Belinda's face stiffened, eyes darting toward Donnie, who no longer met her gaze. A man near the wall stood. You're telling me my dues went to, what exactly? Flyers and fish fry. Someone else echoed, where's our money, then? Donnie cleared his throat and removed his name tag. I can't defend this. I resign. The silence that followed was heavy, more complete than any shout could have been. Even the coffee machine had gone quiet. Kyle took a slow breath. I propose a vote to dissolve the current HOA board effective immediately. Gasps, followed by a single voice from the second row. But Caldwell. At last, she said, softly but clearly. Frank, get down, I second that. Loud and legal. Belinda left through the side door, not a word, not a wave. By morning, the HOA office was still locked, though someone had slid the key under the mat. The glass door reflected the first light of day, and a single cardboard box sat just inside, neatly packed, taped across the top, labeled in her crisp handwriting, personal. No one waited outside. No one took a photo. At Lou's Cafe, the news spread not through shouting, but through pauses. Between sips of black coffee and bites of burnt-edge toast, people leaned closer to each other. The kind of conversation that curved inward, like the hum before a hymn. She's really gone, someone asked near the window. Gone, Lou confirmed, sliding a plate of eggs toward Mrs. Caldwell. Didn't even unplug her nameplate. Kyle sat at the counter, hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. He hadn't asked for anything free, and Lou hadn't offered, but the refill came anyway. Behind him, Marissa and Frank shared a corner booth. The diner felt smaller today, in the best way, like a room full of witnesses who had just agreed not to forget. The Lakemont Herald sat folded on the table between them. The front page headline read, HOA shakeup ends with quiet victory and a new beginning. Frank tapped the folded paper once, then picked up his pen. This'll do, he said, signing the bottom of a page he'd been working on since dawn. The title read, Letter to the Editor, When Silence Breaks, Communities Breathe. At the Claybourne porch later that afternoon, the breeze had picked up just enough to make the mailbox creak on its hinges. Frank, as always, had noticed. He stood now with a cloth in hand, rubbing the brass nameplate on the old fence post, then moved to dust off the carved wood above it, the one that read, Claybourne, EST 1971. He paused when he reached a smudge and polished until the letters showed again. Down the street, Kyle helped remove a warped HOA sign from the entrance of the neighborhood. The screws came out easily, like they'd been waiting. He set the sign gently against the curb, where someone else would repurpose or forget it. Back in the kitchen, Marissa found an envelope slid under the front door. Inside, folded carefully, was a small card. No name, just handwriting, steady but soft, you gave us back our voice. She read it once, then again. That evening, Mrs. Caldwell walked by on her usual loop. She stopped at the corner where the HOA bulletin board used to hang. In its place now was a simple corkboard with a handwritten note. HOA Reorganization Committee, open applications welcome. Next to it, someone had taped up a drawing from the community's youngest resident, stick figures holding hands, and in the middle, a cat with a crown. Marissa glanced toward Frank as the sun dipped behind the rooftops. Still think a towed car wasn't worth a fight? The new sign was hand-carved, not printed, and that was the point. It stood beneath the tallest oak near the community center, its wood dark with oil and sunlight, letters etched with care. This community believes in due process, since 2023. The Memorial Day weekend sun filtered gently through flag bunting strung between lamp posts. Folding chairs, some metal, some borrowed from porches, lined the grass in crooked rows. A long table at the back held pitchers of lemonade sweating in the heat, and pecan tarts arranged in neat little circles. The music wasn't loud, just a gentle melody played from someone's Bluetooth speaker tucked inside a picnic basket. Kids darted between legs with red, white and blue ribbon streamers, while a girl with finger-stained palms passed out sketches from her Saturday art class. Mrs. Caldwell sat on the nearest bench with her usual paper fan, nodding at everyone who passed as though they'd all just come home from somewhere harder. At the front, a new banner hung over the old bulletin board. It simply read, Resident Rights and Responsibilities. Marissa stood beside the wooden post, her fingers brushing the red ribbon tied across the base. She looked out at the small gathering, a few dozen neighbors, some in folding lawn chairs, others just standing in soft silence. Frank sat further back, one leg crossed over the other, the latest Lakemont Herald open across his knee. His daughter's photograph was on the front page. He hadn't said anything about it. Just kept it neatly folded, as if proud wasn't something that needed to be spoken aloud. Kyle lingered off to the side under the shade of a ficus, laptop open across his lap. The new HOA website blinked softly from the screen, a clean design, white background, a navigation tab labeled Resident Rights pinned at the top. Below it, a single line, "You belong here." Grace wasn't present, but a small card had been taped to the lemonade jug with her handwriting, "Justice served cold. With lemon." As the ribbon slipped from Marissa's hands and fluttered to the grass, polite applause stirred through the crowd. She stepped aside to let 2 volunteers post the new policy beneath the sign. The Claybourne clause, "No fines, penalties, or disciplinary action shall be issued without written notice and a formal hearing." Walt leaned over toward Mrs. Caldwell. "Took em long enough," he whispered. She smiled but didn't reply, her eyes already fixed on Frank. He stood slowly and made his way to Marissa, the Herald folded under his arm. From beneath his jacket, he handed her a worn gray file box, its edges taped and labeled in old ink, 2009 to 2012. The same one he'd carried for years. "For the next time someone forgets whose porch they're on," he said. Marissa took it with both hands, the weight not in the box but in the quiet gesture behind it. She stepped back toward the sign as the local livestream camera panned gently across the crowd. Kids waved at the lens. Someone in the back shouted, "Say justice." She took a breath, adjusted the mic just slightly, and smiled, not wide, just enough. "This lake isn't just pretty. It's principled." On a quiet holiday morning, the carved wood sign stood in sunlight, but the real change was in the voices around it, stronger, steadier, no longer afraid to ask why. Lakemont Hills didn't just remove a leader, it reclaimed its compass. When ordinary people hold the line with truth, even the most polished rules can be rewritten. Like a lamp lit in the attic of a long-forgotten house, justice can still shine, quiet, persistent, and meant to be shared. Maybe that's all it takes, one stand, and a few neighbors who remember what fairness feels like.